So you come home from your 9 to 5 and you get started on your deep work session for your side hustle or business. You've optimized all of the factors that you've been told about. You go away in your room, no distractions, everything's set up, but some days you just realize you're not able to get into that flow state as easy. And why is that? In this video, we're going to talk about how your state of mind and how your dopamine levels before going into your deep work can actually affect your deep work. And by the end of this video, I hope to give you some practical insights and advice you can implement today, going into your next deep work session, that I think will really make a significant difference. I'm Thomas. I'm a full-time doctor right now. I'm working on my own business online presence, which is this YouTube and online community of deep working people, like-minded people like myself. So I'm going through these challenges, these obstacles myself, and I'm just sharing my insights. So today we're going to talk about the state of mind going into deep work. I've noticed in myself that if I was to have a really peaceful day, maybe I'll go for a walk in nature, have a meditation session, go to the gym, and then I went into deep work, it would just be a lot easier to get into. It would be easier to focus. Comparing that to a day where I feel a bit more lazy, maybe I've checked my phone a lot of times, maybe I've watched a movie, that kind of day is just so much harder to get into that flow state. So we're going to talk about why this is. I think the main factor is your exposure to dopamine. If you're constantly exposed to dopamine in the day, your dopamine receptors are pretty rattled already. It's going to take more dopamine to have that same response. When you're releasing a lot of dopamine in the day, when it's looking at phone, etc., you have these big spikes and your receptors actually down regulate because there's such a dopamine release. The opposite happens if you minimize the dopamine, your receptors upregulate and it's more sensitive to small little things. So you could have the same dopamine, you could have the same dopamine effect on a smaller stimulus because the receptors are more upregulated. And I think going into a deep work session, which is very boring, not a lot of stimuli, you want to be as prepared as possible. So you want to have as receptive dopamine receptors as possible. And the best way to do this is to minimize your dopamine in the hours before your deep work. And if you are getting dopamine release, like the activities I mentioned, going for a walk, going to the gym, having a cold shower, I'm still releasing dopamine. But the difference is that those sorts of dopamine releases aren't what I like to call easy dopamine releases. So they're not just free dopamine releases. If I was to look at my phone, that would be a instant dopamine spike, no effort at all. But if I'm to go out into nature, that's not a spike in dopamine, that's a dopamine over a long period of time. It requires effort. Same with having a cold shower, that requires effort, a bit of pain before the dopamine's released. Like you still get a big significant spike of dopamine from a cold shower, but the difference is there's no come down, and that's because the come down's kind of already come at the start. When you have a cold shower, it's painful, it's a lot of effort, so you have that trough at the start, and then you have the dopamine release, and then when it comes down, it doesn't really go much below your baseline. The opposite is, if you don't have that pain before, the spike happens, and then you're going to have a come down. And I think, that is what is happening when you go into a deep work session and your brain's been exposed to these short-term, free, easy dopamine releases in the day. It's harder to feel good because you're doing nothing. You're not getting exposure to these stimulus. And in fact, your dopamine receptors, your dopamine level going into this session where there's not stimulation is probably going to be below your baseline, and it's going to take a while. You're probably in that that period where it's taking a while to go back to your baseline. And if you really want to experience that flow state, that big dopamine release, which really facilitates our learning, our productivity, and our focus, in which we experience flow state when we focus in a deep work session, then you want to be at your baseline at least, and you don't want to be in the below baseline section. And I think that's what's happening when you experience these lazy state of minds and you experience these periods where it's harder for you to get into that flow state in a deep work session. It's really all to do with the previous dopamine exposure and the types of dopamine. So whether it's easy dopamine or hard dopamine. So this is just what I've observed, and a few of these phrases are coined from Dopamine Nation, which is a great book, and it was the book that coined these phrases: hard dopamine, easy dopamine. But practical ways of which you can get, leverage your dopamine are the things I talked about. So limiting easy dopamine, making sure you're still at baseline going into your deep work session, and 2, expose yourself to hard dopamine things like cold showers, because then you're going to actually potentially still be at a higher dopamine baseline that's going to carry on. And I've definitely noticed this. If I have a gym session, my dopamine levels can be higher, and if I carry that on, it can be higher for a few hours, and I can carry that on into my deep work session. So that's what I would describe as leveraging dopamine, using dopamine to our advantage. By doing hard things, by going to the gym, by having a cold shower, by going for a run. That's what I would consider as leveraging dopamine, because you don't get that rebound come down because it's hard, and instead you get that slow release, which will carry into your deep work session and make it more interesting, make it easier for you to get into the flow state. So that's all I wanted to say in this video. As I said, hope you can take some action into your next deep work session, and that might just be the last thing that really, gets you into the flow state better. So yeah, if you are interested in more insights, then I want you to subscribe to me, or join my deep work community in the description, because that's where you can have access to me, and I will help you guys. I am in the same position as you, and I think it's pretty cool to build a community of like-minded people where we can inspire each other. So if you have a 9-to-5 and you're working on your business and you want to maximize your flow states, your deep work, then this community is for you. So I'll see you there.